the economy that we had, that the structure that we had, or we still have, is a house of cards. Everybody knows it. It was running on debt. The last 5 years was essentially a Keynesian, you know, influx of trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars that was, invented by the government and slushed out into the economy. And again, talk about crack steroids. Holy shit. That just doesn't work. And people feel rich, but the prices go down. Their prices go up, and the value of the purchasing power and wealth goes down. So it's a real mixed bag. And the fact that he's trying to fix this, and the things that he's trying to do, I do think in general they're the right thing. It's gonna suck. It's gonna suck coming off the crack steroids, but we have to do it. And this is actually very good news. I think everybody was thinking that this was gonna be
I
very bad.
I like to see a few. I mean, look, I want these things to succeed. Obviously, I want. I don't question Trump's motivations. I actually think he really wants to make him. He's trying to do the right thing. This is an encouraging report. Um, but I think a couple things, a couple points I think are important. One is that I don't, and markets can overreact. They can overreact to things. They're reflexive. They respond to perceptions. And obviously, you don't want the market, on a day-to-day basis to dictate decision making. All of that is true. However, um, here's what I think is why this problem is chronic, and its instability, in my view, I don't think is going to go away. And that is because we don't know exactly why. We don't have a consistent rationale for tariffs. Let me tell you what I mean. So on the one hand, we have people saying they're a bargaining chip, right? Um, sorry. They're there. We're going to have them, and then we can negotiate them away, even at a moment's notice, right? So they're there to put pressure on foreign governments, and then we're going to. All right. At the same time, we're talking, making your point, Eric, which I think is totally valid, that we need to restructure the economy. We need to move towards Main Street, away from Wall Street. We need to actually build things. We need to become, self. In some ways, we can't be dependent on China to make all our stuff. But here's the problem: if these things can be negotiated away, well, then what actual producers, corporate producers, and from big to small, like, is stability, right? So if I'm going to actually reallocate my capital to build things in America and hire people in America, that's a tremendous capex expenditure, right? Which means if I can get totally sandbagged, if I do that and then the tariffs get negotiated away, so now I'm stuck holding the bag with these factories that are no longer competitive. So the problem is, a lot of it is the sequencing, the order of operations. The other thing is, I know that the Trump administration said we're going to lower costs of energy. We're going to have the External Revenue Service. We're going to take away income taxes. We're going to make the tariffs do that job. Yes, however, if that's going to take a lot longer to influence, to affect people, more than the, I think, a very strong potential to increase prices at places for the working class where they shop, like the dollar store and Walmart. Um, and so the sequencing is off, right? You're going to lose political will from these things before they have time to take effect, and then that's going to crash what they're trying to do. Even though, to be honest, the rationale for what they're trying to do is inconsistent. So the other problem I think is important to recognize is that there's a lot of, frankly, dialectical rationale from the right, which I find very interesting. That, this is about the working class, and the working class has gotten screwed by the investment class, and we're actually going to really build things, and we're going to bring back jobs. Look,
Yeah, I just said all that.
this report is that you mentioned is really important. Okay, like, I think that if this is the start of something big, hallelujah, I'm all behind it. Like, I want this to succeed. I just don't see, based on the math. Like, I mean, yet I don't see this doing what they say it's going to do, and I don't even see a consistent rationale for what they're doing, which I mentioned earlier. But back to the point is this: what percentage of U.S. households have retirement accounts? What percentage? 60%, almost 60%, so 55 to 60% now. The median amount in those accounts is $40,000. For a 40-year-old head of household. So this idea that somehow the working class does, they're fine. There is a working class that does not have these accounts, but the idea that somehow it's this it's enough voters to overcome the effect on the middle class or upper middle class or whatever, I don't think that really, I don't think the numbers are there to justify that. Okay. So, like, uh, these are my concerns, okay, in general about the discourse around tariffs and how it's going to play out. I want it to succeed. I want, believe me, I think all of the way that the problems, the structural problems have been identified are correct. That you would correctly identify, Eric. I just don't see how. I haven't heard a good argument for how the mechanics of these changes are actually going to play out. Also, I'm not tremendously confident that the way that they released on Liberation Day, the numbers for the for the foreign countries, their tariffs that were being reciprocal about were calculated as a non sequitur. I mean, you cannot use a trade
They
deficit.
used the
You
trade
cannot use
deficit.
trade deficit
Example.
numbers as a proxy for tariffs. It's like literally, it's like you know, it's not there. It's not there.
So,
That's
Paul,
my take.
let me get. I just want to summarize your take. You feel that maybe this is more the tariffs
Yes.
is more of a game of truth, more of a game of dare than it is some very methodical timeline that's been planned
Yeah,
out. That
I want to know which it
smart.
is because I hear both rationales and one kind of cancels out the other. So I haven't actually heard, and maybe I'm missing it. If it's out there, believe me, I'd love to hear it.
I do think that they've been clear. Here's the thing. Trump is always look. It is a muddled message a lot of times. I honestly don't think it's any more muddled or any clearer than Biden was. Honestly, right? Like if you think back.
No, look, relatively, I totally agree with you. I'm not, but like, don't we want better? Like, isn't
Yeah,
that
no, no,
the
no.
point?
Like, and
Yeah,
and I am agreeing with you, but you know, the there are a lot of interests and people, and especially the media. They don't like him. They don't want like, they don't want this to work. And I know that
I
sounds like
agree. I think
hope.
there's a lot of bad motivations out there
Yeah,
that
yeah. And
want it
again,
to
I don't
fail.
mean it
And
like
yeah,
that, but what I'm saying is I think it's a mix of both. I think it's have they messaged perfectly? No, not at all. But I do think he's been consistent. Again, he ran on this. He announced this the day after he was elected. He's like, bring in all the
careful what
tariffs.
you wish
Everybody's like,
for. I mean, like,
ah.
yeah, I mean,
you know,
I
and
agree.
and
Like
and everybody's
all these
acting
things.
surprised
Okay.
when it's happening, even though he's been saying it's coming, it's coming. We're gonna do it. We're gonna do it. I
I
think
know. Well, they
Yeah.
shouldn't be surprised. Absolutely. Like, if you're a fool, if you're surprised.
right.
From my perspective, his administration is just not on top of uh, keeping everyone in the know of what this means uh, when it comes to when these things will transpire. If you leave too much guesswork out there, then your opponents are going to come in and fill in the gap
That's
for
a
you.
great point. That's a great point. And I
That's
think,
all I'm saying. And then these
like the left, they have these explainers
Yes.
videos on NPR where they come out and they
so
say,
the
here's what's
fact that
happening.
all of us here have to do this kind of like what his intentions are tells me that the administration needs to be more on the ball about it so that we're clear.
Again,
Like,
they're up. Look, you're right. The left has NPR. They also have the New York Times and the Washington Post and CNN and blah, 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 and every local paper across the country to carry their water and be like, oh, Korean Jean Pierre actually meant that, or Biden actually did this, or whatever. Trump has Fox, and they're actually not as water carrying. I think.
No, Trump. No, I'm sorry. That's a cop out. Trump has Fox. He has Newsmax. He's got the podcast industry. He's got
Those aren't the
Rogan.
same thing. They
People are
do, but they're
getting the
not the same
message through.
thing.
That's how he won a freaking
The left
election is
still
through
owns so
social
many more
media.
institutions than the right. It is not even a contest.
that can't be an excuse moving forward because what
I didn't
happened
say
to the
it was an
podcast
excuse.
president,
I didn't
right?
say it was
Wasn't
an
he?
excuse, but it causes it causes problems with messaging. And when you have the bulk of the media, the bulk of academia, all of Hollywood, all of the music industry, all of government, like in a lot of the church, the left owns all of these institutions by like 80-20, 85-15, 90-10. And again, look, yay, podcasts are coming up and we're making inroads and all this stuff. Look, I'm not saying it's cut and dry. I'm just saying
And
that
their readership is down. Their viewership is down on
it
CNN,
absolutely is,
CNN.
but they still own it.
Fox
They
News
still have
has more viewers.
they
for
still,
just about every show at the major time in the major time slot.
if Biden was doing a similar thing, and he did a lot of shit, a lot of huge shit. Like think, take the Green New Deal, which they rebranded the Inflation Reduction Act.
Yeah.
And remember how that was sort of sold, like from every touch point that the left owns, it was sold as this inflation reduction magic sauce from your friendly government. All I'm saying is that Trump does not have that automatic repeater. And again, what you're talking about, the inroads that Fox has made, the inroads that podcasts have made, that's relatively new. It's also, distributed, right? It's not the same structure. And this
Okay.
legacy media, this corporate media that the left can rely on to sort of couch and parrot their message,
Okay,
is
I agree
something
with
that
you,
the right simply
especially
does
at the
not.
local level. But do we want the right to be a propaganda arm of the
No,
Republican
no, no,
Party?
no, no, no. And
No.
and on this podcast, we talk a lot about how we can see the narrative go out, like those phrases that we see, right? We see, go like the left puts out a phrase, and then all of a
Constitutional
sudden you see
crisis.
it everywhere, and you're like, wait a second, there was an email that went out, and everybody's following it. Again, all I'm saying is that Trump, like the right doesn't have that. I agree with you. I don't want that. But what I see from sort of a branding, messaging standpoint from what Trump is doing is he's trying to do it himself. And that's where it gets messy because, in a way, Trump is really good at branding and selling in a way. And in some ways, he's not. He's almost like the My Pillow guy, right? From a perspective, right? You sell a lot
Like
of
Lindell.
pillows, but your ads still fucking suck.
Well, he
Like
does have surrogates, right? Like he's got Lutnick, Besant, like they're going out there, they're going on the shows, they're talking, but I think they're not. Look, I totally think the messaging needs to improve, but I can't be a part of that effort if I don't understand the rationale well myself, which I
right.
don't. I freely admit I see too many contradictions in the moving parts, and like it's not actually,
Yep.
so
And,
so I
and that's
if
what
it's a
I think is the
turd, I'm not,
problem.
and I
Yeah.
also like I don't want to paint gold on a turd because that makes me look like an idiot,
Yeah.
right? So like I
And
need to know,
yeah,
is it a turd
yep.
or is it real? And like how is it not a turd? And if you
I
can
just
tell
want
me
to
it's a
Yeah.
turd, that's
This goes back
basically
to
what
what
I
I
mean.
was saying earlier. There is no solid message. So you're not going to get a top-down approach to telling the story and telling this message because there is no solid message. So the Republican Party leadership can't tell it. The individual Republicans, representing people at their town halls can't tell it. So they can't tell it to the media in a way that that's going to resonate the message. You know, I
And,
just don't like.
it's not.
You need a message first.
Yeah, I do think that we're agreeing, but I would argue that it's not just a messaging problem, right? This tariff thing is, well, you can say it's not new either. From
But the scope
125
of
years
it,
ago.
the scale of it is new.
The scale of it and
Tariffs
using it
2.0.
right in modern times is really, really new. And it's sort of, we're not in Kansas anymore. And this is such a, so and I guess my point is, again, it's not just a messaging issue, which I agree with, right? They're not doing a great job. Lutnick is saying different shit than Peston, than Trump, than Elon. And it's messy. It's not helpful. You also don't have the water carriers. And again, I would argue that that's a good thing, to Nikki's point. Like, we're not. Like, you have, a few of these influencers that come out with their binders. They're the ones that are going to be like,
oh
tariffs
my
good,
God.
tariffs are great, shut up. Like, but the right doesn't have that many. And my point, Nikki, before was that the left still has that, right? That's what they have. They push it out, and it gets a lot of people. It convinces a lot of normies, right? Well, I saw it in the New York Times, the local news thing did it, and I heard a blurb on NPR. It must be true.
But
Right?
why isn't that?